getting back to the point of accountability and policy, and Ross raised the issue of all powerful unions protecting their own, even if their own are called. Those are the names, but the data behind it. What happened and what was the result? And it's a two-part question. The other part of this question is, to what extent has the police commission been stymied in what it wants to do by the police union in this town?
So the first question, when I first got on the commission, one of the things that I wanted to do was, one of the things that we used to do when I got on the commission was have open disciplinary hearings. It was open to the public. And there's a POBRA, there's a police, I don't know. POBAR.
Police officers, it's the Bill of Rights.
It's their Bill of Rights. And so their Bill of Rights said it could not be open. And so 8 months into the commission, we had to close all police personnel hearings from the public. And I really fought against that, but I lost. It's because it's a state law. It's something that needs to be addressed and maybe looked into, because those hearings should be public, you know, because they're just a little bit different type of employee, so to speak. But I argued strongly. There was backlash against me for trying to keep that open. From the mayor's office on down, indicating, you know, that, I forgot the words the adjectives they used for me. But anyway, I thought it should remain open, and it was closed. It was a bar. So that's a bar. And those are some of what we talked about earlier, changing some of these state laws so we get more transparency. And the second question was, have we been stymied? There are issues. There are issues that we would like to, things that we like to implement, but there's a meet and confer in place with the police union, and we do have to meet and confer with them on issues, because a lot of it's regarding employment. It's in their contract. So there are things. The hearings. The disciplinary hearings was the most significant one that I can think about. The second one is, as I helped put in place the early warning system. So if an officer right away, you know, just insulting a citizen, just, you know, spitting on somebody, whatever, just right away when the behavior starts, that they're identified and that they're followed, and if they can't make it, then they're drummed out, or they get counseling to stay in. But it's taken them forever to get off the ground. We didn't have the technology to put it together. We hired an information officer. He quit, and it's there now, but it's just not as active as it should be. It's something that's important. There was one last thing that these guys that I wanted to address on that, and I'm sorry, just went out of my mind.
I just wanted to say something about that too. I had a friend in high school who witnessed his friend being brutalized by the police, and he was videotaping what was happening, and the police smashed his phone. So his mother, and then the police took both of them to jail. This was in the early 2000s. And his mother filed a complaint with the police department, but there was never any follow through. No one ever called her, no one ever told her that your letter that you wrote has been filed and we're gonna follow. Nothing happened as a result of that. And so again, with the accountability and the enforcement of these policies, I think that it's a public right for people to know how they can go about making complaints, what's going to happen when they make these complaints, and who's going to be responsible for holding these officers accountable for their actions.
We're a little bit different. We have an Office of Citizens Complaint that do investigate independently of the police department.
Yeah, some of you might have the historical memory of Dolores Huerta getting the shit beaten out of her by the SSPD in the 80s.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a lawsuit that she promptly turned into a foundation because she won the lawsuit. Now, were any of the police officers involved in that beating? Did they have to pay out of their own salaries, or was it all the city paying
You
money?
know, I wasn't on the commission at that time, but I don't know the intricacies.
And I just wonder if that's I mean, it seems like as an accountability measure, it doesn't really work if someone else is paying for someone else's bad deeds. But I do know that happened in the 1980s.
You know, I'm an attorney, so I know under civil law, you can go, you know, you sue the city, but you can go after an officer on an individual basis. It's a larger hoop you gotta get through to get through his basic immunity, but you can do that. So I don't know what happened in that case.
Okay, it's getting close to our 9 o'clock end time. Okay, you can have the last question. Last
Very
question.
good one. I honestly really like Sheriff Mercury's approach to pretty much everything, because he's an innovator, thinks outside the box. So I wonder if in this whole topic anybody has looked at maybe other completely different parts of the world. Like, it just occurred to me the corporate world, right? To be honest with you, it's not a perfect world at all, but having seen it every day, there's some things where they install extremely strict processes. Frankly, in part because they're afraid of getting into lawsuits that can, get them into hundreds of millions of dollars in cost, right? So as imperfect as the corporate world is, I wonder if somebody, and I think we have a dearth of people in government that have real corporate experience, but that doesn't mean this cannot be done, has looked at exactly how these corporations take care of issues, many of which have to do with equality, with rights, and so on, and how they essentially, put a giant set of processes, and a lot of it is training, super strict training that everybody has to go through, to essentially make it almost impossible for these, quote, accidents, end quote, to happen to them. Because they know if one of them happens, they could get into real billion-dollar trouble, right? So I'm just wondering if anybody has even thought about making that connection. Do at least a study, maybe a pilot of some sort, so that you just force it not to happen. Because you just have installed the processes in your institution that make it so difficult for it to happen that it's going to be one in a million.
Yeah, I hear what you're saying. Supervisor, Sheriff.
Well, thank you for the compliment.
And I mean,
I don't want Google to be policing,
no, me neither.
but I'm sure that there's a role for technology integrated into the question of transparency and making it accountable for the public. Again, I think that the kernel that unites us, I think, in this discussion is about trust. And I think trust needs to be improved between the public service agencies and law enforcement in the communities in which they serve. And I sometimes think, and I've been in the city 30 years, and I can't tell you how astonished I am by the rapidity of change just in the last 3 compared to the previous 27 in San Francisco. It's been intense what the changes have been in the last 3 years. And I think what's getting lost in that is people still hold on to the old image of San Francisco, but not looking at where San Francisco is and where it's going now. And I think that lulls us to a false sense of who we are. I think there has to be kind of a rewrite about what we do in community policing. I think it's important we deal with issues that I don't know if got discussed before I got here, but I think it intersects. I'll tell you one area, while we're making inroads in many different parts of our jail population, one area that is going to be an ongoing challenge for us and the rest of the city are people who are suffering with mental illness. I don't see the city having its hands around this issue at all. But yet, as sheriff, I reject the notion that our jails be substitute for mental health asylums. And yet I don't see really an alternative model for that. And many of those folks are African American, or they are brown skin, because they're of an economic class or a class where they've been disenfranchised, that we're not addressing that. And I didn't hear that in the State of the City address recently, but what I did hear was the trumpeting that 5 hospitals are being built, but yet what wasn't said is that not a single one of them was required to have a psych bed. It used to be the requirement in the city that every new institution that was built would have a psych bed. And so what I'm seeing is this sort of, cutting corners around all this great growth and prosperity of San Francisco, and looking back at the foundation of what I think needs to be the kind of San Francisco that we all have really wanted to live to its promise. I think that is for another discussion.
Yeah, I think you're probably right. And that was going to be my last question to the panel, to each of you. Could you give us your suggestions on how we keep this conversation going? Because we have a tendency to all get together when there's a crisis, or it comes to our consciousness, and then it kind of flows away. and then until the next one comes up and then it flows away again. But I think this is I believe, this is such a big issue, and it's not an issue that's gonna go away soon, and it doesn't lend itself to quick and, 2-second bite solutions. So how do we keep this conversation going about making sure that we have policies here and procedures here in the city of San Francisco that possibly we can export at some time to make sure that people feel they're getting justice, that the system is transparent enough for us, for all of us. So I'll start with Supervisor Murphy. I started with that end of the table. Sheriff. Sorry, he was my supervisor. Sheriff.
It was a labor of love, being soup here. Well, first of all, I'll give you all my business card if you want it. So there's one way of staying in contact, and something I learned as the supervisor, it might seem a little mild or cliche, but the Sheriff's Department didn't even have a newsletter, so we started one, and it's a monthly report of what we do. I think you'd be surprised the kind of range our department has. It's more than just about doing jails. It does a lot. Only 50% of our budget is related to the jail system. So that's one of it. The other is when there is a community discussion like this and others, ask yourself who's missing from the table. I think this discussion about community policing, I think public health, the public health department has a very serious slice of the pie. I think the sheriff's department has a slice of the pie. I think the adult and juvenile probation departments have a slice of the pie, and so on. I do not put all these answers on the police department. And I don't believe that it's fair to them to simply answer singularly how to solve these issues. But that's what's missing in City Hall, is that there isn't the required dynamic of putting us in the room together and nobody can leave until you figure it out. And that hasn't happened. And I think that that's a problem, because what that does is it frays at the fabric, I think, at communities where they really feel vulnerable or in distress, and that isn't happening.
Thank you. Stephen?
Yeah, well, I appreciate the opportunity to be out here with all of you tonight. Obviously, we didn't solve racial injustice in America in this discussion.
We haven't even had that conversation.
But that is the heart of this conversation. And I don't think that we talked enough about race tonight, but it is central to this issue, and it's usually people of color bringing up the topic of race, and so we sort of hold that responsibility to advance that. I think our white allies, and I say our friends, also talking about race and the importance of it, and dynamics like this are critical. The important thing to remember is that there is no silver bullet. Policing policy will not change everything that we want to see happen in our communities. But it is, like the sheriff was saying, a slice of the pie. Our schools are a big slice of that pie. And the way that we talk about income inequality and food injustice, right, health disparities, all these things contribute to these two worlds that we have that are especially stark in San Francisco. So if we're gonna find a way to do it, I think San Francisco has to be the place that we do it, because the resources are so great and the inequality is so large, and the willingness, because we're such a liberal city, should be here. So I think it's important for us to remember that we are the ones in charge, and that if we want to see a change happen, it's going to be that we have the agency to take it on. A lot of people in this room decided to come out on a Tuesday night. You're informed citizens. I see a lot of people involved in politics. What the sheriff said about bringing people to the table is key, but realizing your agency and advancing this discussion, especially in places where they don't want to have it, I think is going to be the way that we continue to turn this corner. We bring people into the discussion, and we confront our friends on issues of racial inequality, and we arm ourselves with information so we can talk about it comfortably. And we show up to things like this, right, and bring our friends along too.
Thank you, Atisha.
So the organizing work that I do around Black Lives Matter is geared particularly towards community re-infrastructure and reinvestment, and how can we create long-term sustainable organizations and programs and workshops within Black and brown communities that will allow us to flourish long-term So policy is just one leg of this movement, this Black Lives Matter movement that's currently happening. But Black love also matters. Black mental care, health care, having these conversations around how can we begin to heal as a community. And so that's the work that I do in having conversations with our community about the racism, like Stevon is saying, and police brutality and policies that are happening are important conversations to have because a lot of people just don't know. A lot of people don't have access to education. And I call myself and my friends roses from concrete. I'm from Hunters Point, but I'm not the standard, if you will. I'm not what people assume to have come from Hunters Point. People get surprised when they hear me speak. They say, oh, you're so articulate, and all of these things because they assume that a Black person from Hunters Point can't be beautiful and educated. And I think that the conversation needs to be about that our community, we want more for ourselves. We want love, we want peace. And that's all we're asking for and what we're fighting for. And so the work that I do with the community is to help ensure that we have those things long term. Even when the lights are off and no one's talking about Black Lives Matter, we should still be talking about Black Lives Matter as a community.
Thank you. And Patrick?
So one of the things is the San Francisco Police Department has got a grant for cameras. It's in the infant stages. It's a short-term kind of thing. But I do think in terms of a policy has to be put in place for those cameras. And it would be good if we get some Black, brown, and activist people on a committee to meet with us about the policy, what policy should be put in place. Now, it's a pilot. Right, no, that's why I'm telling you, because that's where policy could matter. You know, and the second thing is, you know, President Obama talked about the task force on 21st century policing. That should be supported as well as funding. We need the funding so we can actually put the community policing in place and make it work for us. And you know, for us in the commission, we can revisit the old report, just what we're not doing and make it happen, and perhaps then also maybe put a committee together to talk about what new policies have been developed or our new ideas are outside the box that maybe we can implement. And we should really rally the mayor or the board of supervisors for I agree with you, for younger blood, fresher blood, you know, Black Lives Matter representative on there or something like that. But I think they should have active participation on this commission because this commission is a very powerful commission, you know. And so, and then the last thing is we talked about is changing some of the laws so we can get more transparency in the outcome of these shootings and disciplinary hearings. So that's my 2 cents.
Very good. Thank you very much. Could you give me